started listening to a couple podcasts, and of course, Relevant Recruiter popped up. And I started listening to your podcasts, and I'm like, wow, this is really inspiring because of all the recruiters that you've had on talking about what's been successful for them, what's working for them, and kept hearing over and over and over again, like, you got to put yourself out there. You got to create content and add value to your market. And like, there's got to be something to this. So I'm like constantly listening to that on my way in. And I'm sure my coworkers are like rolling their eyes every time. I'm like, oh my gosh, I heard this on the podcast this morning. And, have y'all tried this? And, one of those was actually your Loom videos that you were kind of talking about doing. And that one really was intriguing me. I was like, what? He's sending these videos to people's individual like messengers on LinkedIn and connecting with them first. So I, of course, looked into it and got a Loom account and started doing that. And it kind of going back to the cold calls and the warm calls, like not knowing if they're actually, reaching people, instantly if somebody's actually viewed your video, if they viewed the whole video, you get a notification. And the feedback that I was getting from candidates was amazing. Like, hey, this is so unique. Nobody's doing this. I really appreciate it. And just, they love to hear, and be complimented, on their background and their experience. And so that to me was really rewarding.
So kind of just transitioning to some of the work that we did together, you mentioned that you're actually following my podcast. You're actually already implementing some things, before we even started, which is inspiring. Again, I think that's really cool that you're not just a student of the game, but you're a player of the game and really executing. What kind of surprised you about, joining the program and working with me?
I wouldn't say anything necessarily surprised me, right? Because going in, I didn't know what to expect, right? I've never done, any kind of recruiter training programs before. But what was refreshing was, for you being a coach through that process was how committed you were to, pushing us to actually implement, right? And holding us accountable. I think that was a huge piece for me. And then I was, really curious. Like I'd always heard bits and pieces from your podcast. I'm like, what is this training going to be about? I was really excited to kind of, hear the bits and pieces behind, how all this works and, putting in that extra work and making the content and really figuring out what our target market was and kind of diving into that.
Awesome. Now, one of the things you've kind of already brought it up about the mixture of like having to do some cold calling, having some other things. In the best way you can describe him, how would you say, what is the difference between that cold call versus like somebody wanting to be on there, like that warm call? What is the difference of that conversation? How does that flow for you?
Well, it's an amazing feeling. I mean, after putting in all that work, there was Loom videos that I had sent back in January of this year. And I had people reaching out in May and June, that I'd already established a relationship with. Some of them I jumped on a call with them back earlier in the year, and some of them I didn't. And they're like, hey, I remember you. You sent me this video, and they were very willing to connect with me and talk because of the time that I had put in through that. That's been very successful, going through your program for me, starting out. I had only been recruiting for a couple months before you, came on and started coaching Talance Group. And I can attribute, out of my 13 placements that I've made so far, 7 of them directly to you. 4 of them were through Loom videos, and 3 of them were through, our automation that we're using through LinkedIn. So it's definitely been a huge part of my success so far.
Oh, it's so awesome to hear. I knew there was some success early on, but that's a great update. Great update.
And not only that, when I joined Talance Group, I think I had like 300 connects on LinkedIn and maybe 500 by the time you started working with us. And now I'm at like 3,800 connects on LinkedIn and over 4,000 followers. So it's been great. I've even got people reaching out to me. Hey, I've seen your posts. I've had a lot of that. And they're good candidates. It's not just, random people reaching out. So that's been awesome to hear, because all that time that, you put in creating the content and hoping that something like that would come back to you, they're recognizing it.
Yeah. this is just from where my perspective, and it's probably something maybe you have given a lot of thought to, maybe you haven't, but most people that go through my program are usually the founder, the owner, the CEO of a company. And I know for a lot of people, once they're putting out content, there's a lot of internal stuff going on, a lot of mindset work going on. And I think one of the things, and again, you may not recognize it, but I think it's really inspiring to me and others, is you were willing to put yourself out there in an industry where you're not even, don't even know the whole industry yet. You're still learning, but while you're learning, you're building some brand recognition for yourself. What was kind of your experience with creating content? Like, what were some of the things that maybe overwhelmed you, or what are some of the things that inspired you?
That's a really good question. I think you kind of touched on it there. I was really nervous at first. It's like, you can look on my LinkedIn. It's no secret how long I've been recruiting and what my past looks like. But you and Talance Group were like, hey, you are relevant because you were an accountant, you worked in corporate, you can relate to these candidates. So I had that going for me to help kind of ease some of that fear of, putting content out there. But, again, like what I learned from Talance Group and all the things that you can add value for your candidates, whether it's interview prep or even for them putting in their resignation and what that conversation is going to look like, and making that, as painless as possible for them. And, the resume advice that we give and just all those things were already out there. So it's really just
Right.
me kind of taking that and making my own and reposting it. So I was very grateful for that, because I feel like I would have been like creating my own wheel if it wasn't for that.
Right.
And so a lot of my content has come directly from this little manual over here from Talance Group. And I've had a lot of really good feedback from people, just even, appreciating just like the little bit of advice I'm putting out there.
Tell me a little bit about the automation, because people usually have a little bit of fear about any type of automation. Like, what was your thinking about automation going in, and what is your thinking about automation now?
Yeah, for automation, I was concerned that it would, my message essentially would be screaming, this is an automated message.
Right.
So, but, you gave us ways to make it more conversational, when you're reaching out and more, doing a little research. Like, for example, I think one of my automated messages, like there was a company here in Houston. I knew they were moving their offices, 30 minutes down the road, which in Houston, that can impact somebody like be an hour plus commute.
Right.
So just, hey, I heard your office was moving, how does that impact you? And I mean, it was a really good response because, to them, it was just more genuine. And I think it's just all about the message that you put out there, and making sure that you're really fine tuning who you're sending that message to. But yeah, there's always going to be hiccups along the way, but it's like few and far between as far as somebody
Right.
being offended, or maybe you accidentally reached out to somebody that your teammate just reached out to. And it's like, my bad, you're in good hands. And I think that's only happened a few times. And I know that was a concern initially. So
Right.
it's been working out.
What would you say to a new recruiter, that would be considering joining my program?
To a new recruiter, like a rookie recruiter?
Yep.
Well, listen to the podcast. I definitely think that adds a ton of value. It was interesting, some of your podcasts, some of the people that you've had on there, like the $1 Million Recruiter, I had already been looking at her YouTube videos. So I was like, oh, I didn't realize that y'all did a podcast together. So, there's a lot of people that you've had on your show that, there's a lot of good pieces of information to really get a good idea of, what recruiting is going to look like, and what's worked for people, what hasn't worked for people, and just hearing their stories and how they got in, because nobody grows up and says they want to be a recruiter. So yeah, I would say that. And just, I would encourage them, if they are listening to your podcast or they do come across your content, to talk about you to their company. And I know that's really how we've kind of made a connection with Talance Group. I was over here fangirling it. I reached out to Donnie on LinkedIn. I was like, hey, I listen to your podcast every morning on my way to work. You're really inspiring. I'm learning a lot. And, then Jennifer Silvera on our team really got that ball rolling and helped
Yep.
make that introduction to our team. So I would say, you know, just it's worth a shot for sure to, I mean, you know, just like using a trainer to help, you know, hold you accountable for pushing yourself to the next level. You know, when you're working out, it's like same thing in recruiting. It's like you can't just keep using the same thing year in and year out because it worked forever. You know,
Right.
the world is changing. You can't keep going at it the same way you went at it. I mean, you got to kind of look around and adapt to that. So, and I'm a huge fan of work smarter, not harder. So I think that a lot of what you do is, you know, working smarter, not harder, but also, you know, being able to do both at the same time. So.